My fiancé's ex wouldn't stop interfering in our life, so I made it legally impossible for him to continue. The restraining order came back denied on a Friday afternoon, and I remember staring at the email like it was written in another language. Insufficient evidence, the judge had written. No credible threat established. I read those words 3 times before my vision started to blur, before the coffee mug in my hand began to shake hard enough that I had to set it down. Ava was at work, her phone on silent during her shift at the hospital, and I was alone in our apartment with the sound of footsteps pacing above us and the steady drip of our kitchen faucet that I kept meaning to fix. The ex-boyfriend, Derek Huang, had been at our building again that morning, 3rd time that week. He hadn't knocked, hadn't called out, just stood in the parking lot staring up at our windows for 47 minutes while I timed him from behind the curtain, my phone recording every second, my chest tight with something between rage and fear that I couldn't quite name. The security footage would show him there. I knew that much. But apparently, that wasn't enough. Apparently, you needed more than documentation, more than timestamps, more than the sick feeling in your stomach when you saw his car, a silver Nissan Altima with a dented rear bumper, parked across from your building at 2 a.m. on a work night. I had met Ava 14 months earlier at a conference in Denver, one of those pharmaceutical industry events where everyone wore the same blue blazers and drank the same terrible wine and pretended to care about PowerPoint presentations on drug interaction protocols. She was a critical care nurse, sharp and funny, with this way of cutting through bullshit that made me feel like I'd known her for years within the first hour of conversation. We talked through the entire networking mixer, then grabbed dinner, then stayed up until 3 a.m. in the hotel bar talking about everything from childhood trauma to our favorite conspiracy theories. She told me that night about Derek, how they'd dated for 2 years, how it had ended badly 6 months before we met. He couldn't accept it, she said. Kept showing up at her work, sending gifts, writing these long emails about destiny and soulmates and how they were meant to be together. She'd changed her number twice. He'd found it both times. She'd blocked him on every platform. He created new accounts. He's harmless, she told me with this sad little smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just pathetic and unable to let go. I should have heard the warning in those words. Should have understood that harmless and unable to coexist just fine. Until they don't. The first time I saw Derek was at Ava's apartment 3 months into our relationship, back when she still lived alone in that converted warehouse loft downtown. I'd stayed over on a Sunday night, and we were making breakfast when I glanced out the window and saw him sitting on a bench across the street. Just sitting there, coffee cup in hand, staring up at her building like he had every right to be there. Ava saw my expression and followed my gaze, and her entire body went rigid in a way that made my stomach drop. "That's him," she said quietly. "That's Derek." She didn't sound surprised, didn't sound angry, just tired, like this was the 100th time and she'd run out of reactions to give. I asked if she wanted me to go down there, to tell him to leave, but she grabbed my arm and shook her head. "Don't engage with him," she said. "That's what he wants. Attention. Any kind of reaction. We just ignore him, and eventually he leaves." So we did. We ate our breakfast, and pretended we didn't notice him sitting there for the next hour and 20 minutes. And when I left for work, he was gone, and Ava kissed me goodbye like nothing had happened, like there wasn't this shadow hovering over her entire life. It got worse when we got engaged. Ava and I had been dating for 10 months when I proposed, nothing fancy, just the 2 of us hiking in Rocky Mountain National Park on a clear October morning when the aspens were gold and the sky was that deep, impossible blue you only get at altitude. She said yes before I even finished the question, laughing and crying at the same time, and we spent the rest of the day planning our future, talking about where we'd live, whether we wanted kids, what we'd name our hypothetical dog. She posted a photo that evening, just a simple shot of the ring on her hand with the mountains in the background, captioned, "Finally." Within an hour, Derek had commented. 18 times, each comment longer than the last, starting with congratulations and devolving into increasingly unhinged paragraphs about mistakes and regret and how she was throwing away something real for something temporary. Ava deleted them as fast as they appeared, her face getting paler with each one, until she finally just blocked him again and turned off her phone. I held her while she cried that night, feeling helpless and furious in equal measure, and when she fell asleep, I lay awake listening to her breathe and wondering what kind of person does this to someone they claim to love. The messages started coming to my work email 2 weeks after the engagement. I don't know how he got my contact information. Ava swore she never gave it to him, and I believed her. But suddenly, there they were, long rambling emails that showed up in my inbox every few days like clockwork. At first, they were almost reasonable, just warnings disguised as friendly advice. She has issues with commitment, one read. She left me without warning, and she'll do the same to you. Watch your back, man. Just trying to help. Then they got weirder. Detailed accounts of their relationship, intimate moments that made my skin crawl to read, written like he was trying to prove something, trying to establish some kind of ownership over Ava's past and therefore her present. I showed them to Ava, and she went pale, said she didn't remember half of what he was describing, that he was either lying or had constructed some fantasy version of their relationship that never actually existed. We decided to document everything. Started a shared folder on the cloud, dates and times and screenshots, building a case even though we weren't sure yet what kind of case we needed to build. Derek showed up at my gym on a Monday morning in January, and that's when I knew we were past the point of ignoring this away. I was on the treadmill, headphones in, when I caught movement in my peripheral vision and turned to see him on the machine next to mine. Not just in the same gym, that would have been coincidence enough, but literally right next to me in a row of 20 empty treadmills. He didn't look at me, just kept running at this steady pace, breathing hard, sweat dripping down his face. I stopped my workout, grabbed my stuff, and left without showering. Checked the parking lot to make sure he wasn't following me. He wasn't. He stayed inside for another 40 minutes, according to the gym's desk staff, who I asked on my way out, claiming I thought I recognized him from college. The woman at the counter looked uncomfortable when I described him, said he'd joined just that week, had asked specifically about peak hours and whether they kept track of member schedules. I canceled my membership that afternoon and started working out at home, doing push-ups in my living room, and pretending that wasn't exactly the kind of victory Derek wanted. Ava moved in with me 3 months before the wedding, partially because her lease was up and partially because neither of us wanted her living alone anymore. The building I rented in had security cameras, a locked entry system, and a parking garage that required a key fob to access. It felt safer. We told ourselves it was safer. For the first few weeks, it was almost normal. We nested, arranged furniture, argued good-naturedly about whether my ancient recliner had any place in our shared living room. Ava worked her rotating hospital shifts, and I went to my pharmaceutical sales job, and we planned our wedding for September. Nothing elaborate, just family and close friends at a vineyard outside the city. We didn't talk about Derek much during those weeks. Almost convinced ourselves the move had solved the problem, that he'd finally gotten the message and moved on. Then Ava's car got keyed, not just scratched. Someone had carved the word mistake into the driver's side door in letters 6 inches tall, deep enough that you could feel the grooves with your fingertips. It happened overnight while the car was parked in our garage, which meant someone had gotten through 2 locked doors to get to it. The garage had cameras, but they'd been angled wrong, capturing only the top half of a figure in a dark hoodie, nothing identifiable. The police took a report, gave us a case number, and told us there wasn't much they could do without proof of who did it. I paid $1,800 to get the door repainted and installed a dash cam that recorded constantly, draining my car battery twice before I figured out the right settings. The flowers started arriving at Ava's hospital in February. Not once, not twice, but every single day for 2 weeks straight. Elaborate arrangements, different kinds each time, always delivered during her shift so her co-workers would see them, would ask who they were from, would make those knowing comments about how romantic it was. Except, they weren't from me. Each arrangement came with a card signed with just the letter D and some quote about eternal love or soul connections or destiny. The hospital receptionist thought it was sweet until Ava started refusing them, until she had to explain to her charge nurse that these weren't gifts, they were harassment, and could someone please tell the delivery services to stop accepting orders for her. The florist, when we finally tracked them down, said the orders had all been placed online with a prepaid credit card and a delivery address that didn't require signature confirmation. Dead end. Another piece of paper for our growing file folder. Another night of Ava crying in the shower while I sat on the bathroom floor and felt useless. I hired a lawyer in March. Not a big firm, just a solo practitioner named Rebecca Ortiz, who specialized in restraining orders and stalking cases, and had decent reviews on the legal advice websites I'd been frantically Googling at 3 in the morning when I couldn't sleep. She was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with kind eyes and this matter-of-fact way of talking that made me feel like maybe this wasn't hopeless. Like maybe there were actual steps we could take instead of just documenting and waiting and hoping. She reviewed our file, which was now over 60 pages of printed emails, photos, incident reports, and time-stamped observations, and told us we had a case. Not a strong case, she admitted, because Derek hadn't made any explicit threats, hadn't physically harmed either of us, and the legal threshold for a restraining order was higher than most people thought. But we had a pattern. We had documentation. We had enough to try. The filing fee was $200, and she charged us $1,500 for her time, and I paid it without hesitation, feeling like finally, we were doing something more than just being victims. The court hearing was scheduled for a Friday morning 6 weeks later, and Derek didn't show up. Rebecca had warned us he might not, said that a lot of people in his position just ignore the hearing because they don't think there's enough evidence, and in Derek's case, that was almost true. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s named Judge Kathleen Brooks, who'd been on the bench for 23 years according to the plaque on her desk, listened to our testimony, reviewed our documentation, and asked a lot of questions about explicit threats and fear for physical safety. Ava broke down on the stand, describing the years of this wearing her down, the constant vigilance, the way she checked over her shoulder in parking lots and couldn't relax even in her own home. I provided my witness testimony, showed the dashcam footage of Derek following my car for 12 miles on the highway 2 weeks earlier, showed the time-stamped photos of him outside our building. It should have been enough. It felt like enough. But Judge Brooks looked at us with something like sympathy and said she couldn't grant the order. The pattern was concerning, she said, but without credible threats or attempts at physical contact, her hands were tied. She encouraged us to continue documenting, to call the police if he violated our space, to come back if things escalated. That word, if, rang in my ears for days afterward. Derek must have known about the denied order because things got worse immediately. The next week, Ava came home from a night shift to find her bicycle missing from our storage unit in the basement. Not stolen by some random thief, there were other more valuable bikes there that weren't touched, but specifically her bike, a blue Schwinn that she'd had since college, with a distinctive scratch on the frame from when she'd crashed it into a fence post during a particularly bad breakup ride 3 years earlier. She'd mentioned that scratch in one of the emails Derek sent, describing it like it was some kind of romantic memory, proof of their history together. The building's basement cameras were mysteriously offline that night. Building manager apologized, said it had been a technical glitch, gave us a form to file with our renter's insurance. Ava didn't even report it, just looked at me with these hollow eyes and said, "What's the point?" I felt something harden in my chest that day, some combination of rage and determination that made my hands shake when I thought about it too long. This couldn't continue. Couldn't keep escalating with us just reacting, documenting, hoping someone else would make it stop. I started researching Derek. Not just casual Googling, but deep research. The kind where you go through public records and social media archives and cross-reference information until you build a complete picture of someone's life. I learned he worked as an IT consultant for a mid-sized tech company downtown, that he'd been there for 6 years, that he had a pretty clean record except for one speeding ticket from 2019. I learned he lived alone in a condo on the east side, that his parents had died in a car accident when he was in college, that he had a sister in California he didn't seem to talk to much. I learned he posted on Reddit forums about relationship advice and attachment theory, asking questions that made it clear he viewed breakups as problems to be solved rather than mutual decisions to be respected. I took screenshots of everything, added it to our file, and kept digging. The deeper I went, the clearer it became that Derek wasn't just obsessed with Ava. He was obsessed with the idea of her, with this fantasy relationship he'd constructed that had nothing to do with reality. And that made him more dangerous than we'd thought, because you can't reason with a fantasy. The breaking point came on a Thursday night in April. Ava and I had gone out for dinner, nothing special, just this Thai place we liked near the hospital where she worked. We stayed maybe an hour and a half, talked about the wedding, about whether we should go with a DJ or a band, normal engaged couple stuff. When we came home, our apartment door was ajar. Not kicked in, not broken, just slightly open like someone had failed to pull it shut all the way. I made Ava wait in the hallway while I went in first, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Nothing was destroyed, nothing was stolen, but someone had been there, had moved through our space, had left signs of their presence like breadcrumbs meant to be found. The photos on our fridge had been rearranged. All the pictures of Ava and me together moved to the bottom row and replaced with old photos of Ava and Derek that I'd never seen before, must have been from his personal collection. Our bedroom was worse. Ava's jewelry box had been opened, her things gone through, and sitting on her pillow was a necklace I didn't recognize, a silver chain with a small infinity symbol pendant that Ava later told me Derek had given her for their first anniversary, a necklace she'd thrown away when they broke up. We called the police immediately, and this time they took it seriously. The responding officers were thorough, took photos, checked for signs of forced entry, dusted for prints even though we knew Derek would have been too smart for that. Officer James Kowalski, a barrel-chested guy with 30 years on the force, who smelled like coffee and had kind eyes, sat with us for an hour going through everything. The denied restraining order, the escalating behavior, the years of documentation. He was honest with us in a way that was both refreshing and terrifying. "This guy is going to keep escalating," he said. "I've seen this pattern before. It doesn't stop on its own. You need better security, and you need to be prepared to defend yourselves if it comes to that." He gave us the numbers for a locksmith and a security company, suggested we consider getting a guard dog, told us to call 911 immediately if we saw Derek anywhere near us. Then he told us something that changed everything. "If you can prove he was in your apartment, if we can tie him to this scene definitively, I can arrest him for burglary and criminal trespass. That's real charges. That's something that will actually stick. We just need proof." I installed 12 security cameras over the next 3 days. Interior, exterior, every angle of our apartment, and the hallways and the parking garage. Spent $3,000 on a professional system that uploaded to the cloud constantly, that would keep recording even if someone smashed the cameras themselves. Got new locks, deadbolts, a security bar for the sliding glass door that led to our tiny balcony. Ava thought I was going overboard at first, said we couldn't live in a fortress forever, but I saw the way she checked the locks 3 times before bed now, the way she jumped at every unexpected sound. We weren't sleeping well, either of us. She'd wake up from nightmares about Derek standing over our bed, and I'd wake up from nightmares about not being able to protect her, about this escalating to violence before we could stop it. I started sleeping with a baseball bat next to the bed, and Ava started sleeping with her phone clutched in her hand, 911 already dialed and ready to press call. Derek came back 5 days later. The cameras caught everything. It was 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday, and I jolted awake to the sound of my phone buzzing with motion alerts. The security app showed a figure at our apartment door, working on the lock with some kind of tool I couldn't quite make out in the infrared footage. I grabbed my phone and the bat and woke Ava, whispered for her to call the police, and moved toward the door as quietly as I could. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the bat. Every cop show I'd ever watched ran through my head. Don't confront him, wait for police, stay safe. But this was our home, our space, and I was done letting him violate it. I stood on the other side of the door, listening to him work the lock, and when I heard the deadbolt start to turn, I flipped on every light in the apartment and shouted that the police were on their way. The sound stopped immediately. Footsteps running, fast and stumbling. By the time I got the door open, he was gone. But the cameras tracked him all the way to the stairwell. Got a perfect shot of his face in the hallway lighting. Clear, undeniable footage of Derek Huang attempting to break into our apartment in the middle of the night. Officer Kowalski arrested Derek at his workplace 2 days later. I know this because one of my colleagues from work, completely by coincidence, was at the tech company for a sales meeting and saw the whole thing, called me immediately to describe how 2 uniformed officers walked Derek out of his office in handcuffs while his co-workers watched. The charges were burglary, criminal trespass, stalking, and harassment. Rebecca Ortiz told us they'd likely add more as they investigated further, that the DA's office was taking this seriously now that there was video evidence and a clear pattern of escalating behavior. Derek was held overnight, then released on $50,000 bond with conditions that included a no-contact order. Basically, a restraining order, but issued by the court as a condition of his release, meaning if he violated it, he'd go back to jail immediately. It should have felt like victory, should have felt like the end. But mostly, I just felt exhausted and paranoid, jumping at shadows, unable to shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. The preliminary hearing was set for June, and Derek's lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Greg Thornton, who wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, tried to get the charges reduced, claimed his client had been sleepwalking, that he'd been under emotional distress, that there was no evidence of intent to harm. Rebecca tore those arguments apart methodically, walking the judge through the years of documentation, the pattern of behavior, the undeniable footage of Derek attempting to break in. Judge Philip Rennick, a stern man in his 50s who'd seen enough domestic cases to be deeply unimpressed by Derek's lawyer's excuses, denied the motion to reduce charges and actually added a condition to Derek's bond. He had to wear a GPS monitor and stay at least 500 feet away from me, Ava, our apartment, her workplace, and any known locations we frequented. That meant Derek was essentially under house arrest, except for work and court-approved activities. It meant we could finally breathe a little, could go about our lives without constantly checking over our shoulders. The psychological toll became apparent in the weeks that followed. Ava started therapy, twice-weekly sessions with a trauma counselor named Dr. Lisa Montgomery, who specialized in stalking victims and PTSD. I sat in on one session at Ava's request, listening to her describe the years of this, how it had warped her perception of safety, how she still couldn't park her car without checking the back seat first, couldn't walk alone after dark, couldn't trust that any moment of peace would last. Dr. Montgomery explained something called hypervigilance, how trauma rewires your nervous system to always be on alert, always scanning for threats, never able to truly relax. She said it would take time to heal, that even with Derek legally restrained now, the psychological effects would linger. That session broke something open in me. I'd been so focused on practical solutions, cameras, lawyers, documentation, that I hadn't fully processed how much this had damaged us both, how much Derek had stolen from our relationship beyond just our sense of security. The trial was scheduled for August, just weeks before our wedding date. Derek's lawyer tried to postpone, claiming they needed more time to prepare a defense, but Rebecca argued that we'd already postponed our wedding twice because of this situation, that we deserved to move forward with our lives without this hanging over us. Judge Rennick agreed, set the trial date for August 15th, and warned both sides to be ready. The prosecution was being handled by an assistant DA named Thomas Brennan, a quiet guy in his 40s who'd been with the DA's office for 15 years and had a reputation for being thorough and relentless. He met with us 3 times before the trial, walking us through what to expect, how to testify, what questions Derek's lawyer would likely ask. He told us the video evidence was strong, that combined with the years of documentation and the clear pattern of escalating behavior, he felt confident about getting a conviction. But he also warned us that Derek's lawyer would try to paint Derek as the victim, as someone who'd been unfairly demonized by an ex who'd moved on, whose new boyfriend was overly protective and aggressive. "Be ready for that," he said. "Be ready for them to twist this." The trial lasted 3 days. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and slightly stuffy, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look tired. Ava testified first, walking through the relationship with Derek, the breakup, the years of unwanted contact. She was calm and clear, didn't cry even when Derek's lawyer tried to rattle her by reading excerpts from old love letters she'd written during their relationship, trying to prove she'd once loved him and therefore his behavior was understandable. Rebecca objected repeatedly, and Judge Rennick sustained most of those objections, clearly annoyed by the defense's tactics. I testified second, describing the escalation from my perspective, the impact on our lives, the sense of constant invasion. The video footage was played for the jury, 12 ordinary-looking people who watched in silence as Derek worked our lock in the dead of night, as he ran when I shouted, as his face was captured perfectly by the hallway camera. You could see some of the jurors physically recoil. That was our smoking gun, the thing that turned this from he said, she said into undeniable fact. Derek's lawyer put Derek on the stand, and that was a mistake. The prosecutor tore him apart, asked him to explain the emails, the flowers, the months of showing up at our building. Derek tried to claim it was all coincidental, that he just happened to be in the area, that he'd sent flowers because he wanted to congratulate Ava on her engagement. Thomas Brennan pulled out a printed copy of one of Derek's Reddit posts, one where he'd asked for advice about winning back an ex who'd moved on, where he'd written in disturbing detail about strategies for staying present in someone's life even when they didn't want you there. Derek's face went pale. He stammered, tried to claim that was hypothetical, that he was asking for a friend. The jury wasn't buying it. Neither was Judge Rennick, whose expression got progressively more disgusted as the testimony continued. When Derek tried to explain the break-in by claiming he'd been confused and thought it was still Ava's apartment from years ago, even his own lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. The verdict came back in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Derek's face crumpled when the jury foreman read the words, and I felt Ava's hand grip mine so tightly I thought she might break bones. Sentencing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, and in that brief window, everything shifted. Derek's lawyer filed for appeals, claimed the video evidence had been improperly obtained, that the search warrant for Derek's condo, which had turned up the stolen bicycle, the old photos he'd placed in our apartment, and a disturbing collection of items related to Ava, including her old gym membership card and a notebook filled with details about her daily routines, was invalid. Rebecca shut down each appeal methodically, and Judge Rennick seemed to take personal offense at Derek's lawyer's continued attempts to minimize the seriousness of his client's behavior. The sentencing hearing was brief. Derek was given 4 years in state prison for the stalking and break-in charges, plus 5 years of probation after release with strict conditions including mandatory mental health treatment, continued no-contact orders, and GPS monitoring. He was also ordered to pay $15,000 in restitution to cover our legal fees, security upgrades, and Ava's therapy costs. We got married 3 weeks later on September 10th at that vineyard we'd chosen, back when this all felt like a distant problem. The weather was perfect, clear and warm, with just enough breeze to keep things comfortable. Ava wore a simple ivory dress and looked more beautiful than I'd ever seen her, and when we exchanged vows in front of 50 people who loved us, she cried, but they were good tears this time, relief and joy mixed together. I don't think either of us fully relaxed until that night. Until we were in our hotel room and the door was locked and we could finally acknowledge that it was over, that Derek was in custody and we were safe, and we could start building our life without his shadow hanging over everything. We'd survived something that should have broken us, had come through it stronger, more connected, more aware of what we could endure together. That night, lying in bed with my wife, I kept thinking, testing the word, I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for over a year. The epilogue came 6 months later in the form of a letter from the prison. Derek had written to Ava, somehow managing to get mail through despite the no-contact order, probably by having someone else address the envelope. She opened it before realizing what it was, read 3 lines, and handed it to me with shaking hands. It was the same delusional rambling as always, about destiny and mistakes and how he'd been wronged, how he'd get out eventually and prove he was the better choice, how she'd regret throwing away something real. I took the letter directly to Rebecca, who took it directly to Derek's parole officer, and Derek lost privileges for violating the no-contact order even while incarcerated. His sentence was extended by 6 months. The system, imperfect as it was, worked this time, protected us this time. But the letter was a reminder that you can't fully undo this kind of damage, can't completely erase someone who decides they have the right to be part of your story. The best you can do is make the boundaries ironclad, make the consequences severe enough that continuing isn't worth it, make it legally impossible for them to keep hurting you. These days, Ava sleeps through the night most nights, still checks locks before bed, still gets nervous when silver Nissan Altimas pass on the highway, but the raw terror has faded into something more manageable. She finished her trauma therapy last month, and Dr. Montgomery told her she'd done remarkable work processing everything. I still have the security cameras up, probably will forever, but I don't check them compulsively anymore. Don't jump at every noise. We're talking about buying a house next year, somewhere with a yard and good schools, somewhere Derek has never been and never will be. We're talking about kids, about whether we're ready for that kind of vulnerability again, that kind of joy that also means that kind of fear. We're talking about the future in concrete terms instead of hypotheticals. And maybe that's the real victory. Not just that Derek is locked up, not just that the legal system finally worked, but that we got our lives back. Got to make choices based on what we wanted instead of what we were afraid of. Got to build something together that was ours alone, untouched by someone else's obsession. The last I heard, Derek is coming up for parole review in 2 years. Rebecca has already filed paperwork to oppose it, has compiled a new file of documentation, including that prison letter and statements from the guards about his continued obsessive behavior, even behind bars. She's confident he'll serve his full sentence. After that, the 5-year probation period means he'll be under supervision until 2032, meaning any violation sends him back immediately. By then, Ava and I will be in our 40s, hopefully with kids, hopefully in that house with the yard, hopefully so far removed from this chapter of our lives that Derek is just a story we tell about the time we survived something terrible. But I'm not naive enough to think he'll forget. Not naive enough to think that once he's out, he won't try to find some way to insert himself back into our lives. The difference now is that we're prepared. We have lawyers who know our case. We have documentation going back years. We have a system in place that worked once and will work again if it has to. We made it legally impossible for him to continue his harassment, and we'll do it again if we need to. Looking back now, from the safety of distance and locked doors and court orders, I understand something about obsession I didn't before. It's not love. Not even close. Love respects boundaries, accepts endings, wants the other person's happiness, even when it doesn't include you. Obsession is the opposite. It's about control and ownership, and the refusal to accept that someone else gets to choose their own life. Derek never loved Ava. He loved the idea of her, the fantasy he'd constructed, and when reality didn't match that fantasy, he tried to force it into compliance. That's what stalkers do. They confuse persistence with devotion, harassment with passion, invasion with intimacy. And the scary thing is how long the system lets them get away with it, how many hoops you have to jump through to get protection, how much you have to suffer before anyone takes it seriously. We were lucky. Had resources, had the ability to pay for lawyers and security systems, had jobs flexible enough to deal with court dates and police reports. Not everyone does. Not everyone makes it through. If you're reading this and dealing with something similar, and I know statistically some of you are because stalking is horrifyingly common, here's what I learned. Document everything. Every text, every email, every sighting, every incident. Timestamp it all. Get cameras even if you think you can't afford them. Find a lawyer who specializes in stalking cases, not a general practice attorney. Be prepared for the system to fail you multiple times before it works. Know that restraining orders are pieces of paper that don't actually prevent someone from showing up, but they do create consequences when they violate them. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone makes you feel unsafe, you're not overreacting. Your fear is valid even if other people don't understand it. And if you have a partner going through this, support them, but also take care of yourself. The secondary trauma is real. The hypervigilance spreads. You end up carrying their fear on top of your own. I think about parallel lives sometimes, about the version of this story where we didn't have security cameras that night, where Derek got into our apartment, where things escalated to violence before the system intervened. I think about how close we came to that timeline, how many variables had to align for things to work out the way they did. Officer Kowalski taking us seriously, Rebecca being thorough, Thomas Brennan building an airtight case, Judge Rennick being strict about conditions, the jury seeing through Derek's lawyer's attempts to paint him as a victim. Any one of those things goes differently, and we're living a nightmare instead of a cautionary tale with a decent ending. That's the part that keeps me up sometimes. Not fear of Derek anymore, but awareness of how fragile safety is, how much it depends on factors outside your control. We did everything right and still almost lost. What happens to people who do everything right and don't have our resources, our luck, our stubborn refusal to give up? Ava and I went back to that Thai restaurant last week for the first time since that night we came home to our door ajar. It's taken us this long to be ready, to not have that memory ruin the place for us. We ordered the same dishes, sat at a different table, talked about normal things like vacation plans and whether we should finally get that dog we've been discussing. Driving home, passing our old apartment building on the way to our new place across town, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Light. Like I'd been carrying a weight so gradually that I didn't notice how heavy it had gotten until it was suddenly gone. Ava reached over and took my hand without saying anything, and I knew she felt it too. This sense of having survived, of having fought back when fighting back felt impossible, of having made someone who thought he could control our lives face consequences for the first time, probably in his entire existence. He lost his job, his freedom, his ability to hurt us. We got married, moved forward, built something he can never touch. That's justice. Not perfect, not complete, not enough to undo the damage, but justice nonetheless. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.